You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Juliet Spare. The government's Work and Pensions Secretary Iain Duncan Smith has announced plans to cap child benefits for mothers after their second child. So regardless of how many children you have, if you're not working and relying on child benefits, you would only receive the quota for 2 children, even if you had 5 mouths to feed. So is Iain Duncan Smith right to use government social policy in this way in order to save the government money? Or is it too much like social engineering and a step too far? Taking part in the discussion is Tina Boyd from Project Prevention, an organisation in North Carolina which offers cash incentives to women and men addicted to drugs to use long-term or permanent birth control. Jad Adams is an author and historian and chairman of Nightwatch, a charity caring for the homeless in South London. Kirstie Douse is head of legal services at Release, a centre of expertise on drugs and drugs law, and Anthony Ozimic, political spokesperson for the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children. Jad, you work in a charity which supports homeless people. What do you think of the proposed capping of child benefit?
I think there's a good case for saying that no one should have more than 2 children. We're an overcrowded island, and the world indeed is overcrowded, but that's a rather larger argument. If we're just looking at poor people, who are the people that I represent, that I work with, we're looking at people who have very often had chaotic and difficult upbringings themselves, so they're not very well able to look after themselves, and they may have drug problems, may have drink or other problems. No one really cares very much about them. People walk past them on the street. They don't want this junkie begging for money from them. And so, however, as soon as they get pregnant, they really matter. It's the state cares about the child because the state says everything we do is for the welfare of the child. So this perhaps drug-addicted woman that no one gave a damn about before, suddenly she's in for the antenatal visits, she's in for the health visitor, the social workers are interested in her, she's spending time in hospital. Everyone's really concerned because she's pregnant. So, and if she then gets to keep the child, then there'll be child benefit, there'll be money for having had that child. Well, another alternative is let's not give people money for having children. Let's support them for not having children. It will actually help them in the long run, and it will certainly prevent children from being born who may well then be born to have just the same sort of problems that their parents had. And so I see people now who I used to know as the young homeless. Now they're the middle-aged homeless, and that we actually haven't managed to help them very much. They've still got chaotic lifestyles. They've been in and out of housing. It would be better for all concerned if they simply didn't have those children in the first place.
Do you think they might not have chosen to have those children, though, if they were going to have their benefits capped at 2 children, regardless of whether they had their 3rd or 4th? Would that have had any influence on their decision?
The sort of people I work with are generally so feckless, their lives are so chaotic, they may well not think that they're going to end up bringing up the children anyway. So I don't think benefit caps would have much effect on them. However, the benefit, there are some people that I see who are in a slightly different bracket, who come to us just for food to feed their families because they can't afford to feed their families. And those people who may have 5 children might well have chosen to have fewer children if they weren't going to get £20-odd per week per child, which is what child benefit actually gives them.
Doesn't that just show you should put more investment in people at that early stage? Going back to that, the woman that you described, she only becomes cared about when she's pregnant. So if you care about people from the outset and prevent them from becoming homeless in the first place, assist them when they are homeless, and give them that basic needs that any person is entitled to and has a right to, then the issue of children is then secondary to that. I think it's about caring for people and putting in that investment.
Thanks, Kirstie. And to add to that, then, children not the next generation, they're our future, so that the state should care for the mother once she becomes pregnant. that should happen, and that these children have a role and they should be educated and looked after, because they shouldn't be written off just because of the parents.
Absolutely, because you're making an assumption that somebody who's born to a parent who may have been homeless at some point, experienced depression, other mental health issues, drug or alcohol issues, is then going to be no good, like you say, written off from the outset, and that's not necessarily the case. And it's also not the case that people who have drug and alcohol problems are bad parents. I see women, men, families together at legal surgeries across London on a weekly basis, and many of them are fantastic parents, and actually it's the fact that they are parents, it's the children that keeps them going, and it's often people who become pregnant is actually a catalyst for them to change what's happening in their lives in terms of drug, alcohol and other issues.
I don't think that anyone was suggesting that people, even people with chaotic lifestyles or who are very poor, should have no children. The suggestion was from Iain Duncan Smith that they should have only 2 children. I think it's a good idea that no one should have more than 2 children. 2 children is an affordable number of children to have, and that seems a perfectly reasonable thing if the state is paying for people's children, however poor or rich they are. And remember that people get child benefit however rich they are in this country at the moment. That the state should say, well, we think 2 is reasonable. If you can afford more, or if you just insist on having more children, you go ahead and do that. But the state doesn't have to be involved with it.
Anthony Ozimic, do you agree then with a 2-child policy?
Well, certainly not. I mean, I just pick up on something that Jad said about the population of the world and 2 children. In fact, the world is underpopulated. The rate of increase in world population growth peaked in 1970, and we're seeing very big falls in fertility rates throughout the developed world and increasingly in the developing world. So there's no threat of overpopulation. London may be overcrowded, certain other parts of the world may be overcrowded, but it's a question of distribution of population, of wealth, of resources. It's not too many children who are the problem. Now, the question of whether state benefits should be limited in certain ways is an issue, a broader issue of competing theories, economic theories between left and right and so on, support for the welfare state or support for helping people to help themselves, those different issues. And my organisation doesn't take a view on that particular issue. But any pressure from the state, whether it be coercive or suggestive, that people should limit their families is unethical. I mean, we have in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights the right to found a family, and the Declaration and many other international human rights instruments say that the family is the fundamental group unit of society, not the state, and therefore the state does not have a right to say, no, you should only have 2 children. Whether it wants to limit benefits in certain ways is, as I say, it's a broader issue. It brings in other aspects of economics and politics. But really, I see that trying to coerce people in a difficult situation, even through a sort of economic pressure, is contrary to their human rights. It's an inhuman way of trying to solve human problems. We need to address the problem at the root, which is what Kirstie was saying at the beginning. Let's give support. Let's give a right direction. Let's not give a penalty, which is contrary to the dignity of the people involved.
Tina, I'd like to come to you now. Obviously, you're a client from Project Prevention, which means that you've been on the receiving end, as in you've been sterilised by an organisation, by doctors in an organisation in North Carolina, as an incentive for you to stop having any more children because you yourself are battling with drugs. Tina, can you just tell us your story?
Yes, well, I'll be 41 years old in December. My youngest child will be 4 November 18th, and he's currently in foster care for the 3rd time. My mother is raising my 11-year-old, who is cognitively delayed, receptive language, speech delayed. He's just got a mirage of problems as a result of my drug use. And my oldest is 20 years old, and they're all boys. My daughter, who would have been 14 this February of this coming year, died as a result of my addiction at birth. And I've been pregnant 8 times. I think that's enough. I think that's enough kids to. I'd probably be pregnant right now. My son got out of the apartment, my 4-year-old son, because I went to go get drugs in the middle of the night. Got out of my apartment and went a quarter of a mile at 2 o'clock in the morning and was screaming, beating on doors, trying to find his mommy.
Now, Tina, you talk very openly about your desire to get drugs, and your children are living with you and are going off the rails, as it were, at 2 o'clock in the morning looking for you. What is driving your addiction then?
Well, I also suffer from mental illness, and I heard a gentleman speak about that also. So I've been diagnosed bipolar as of 2001, but I've been battling it since I was 9. I remember as early as 9 having issues with that, depression, and so forth. So I've had about 12 suicide attempts. So someone like me, I mean, is that a fit? I'm educated. I mean, I graduated high school. I'm not a stupid person. I know that this is wrong. I know that what I did, leaving my child in the apartment, to go get drugs, was wrong. But the craving, the addiction is just too strong. You can't. It's very, very, very hard to fight. Very hard to fight.
So you yourself were sterilised. Now, what influenced that decision?
The state that I live in was supposed to have stopped paying welfare recipients a couple of years ago, and was only going to pay after if you had, something like more than 2 children. That was it. You weren't going to receive any benefits. But there's also something, disability benefits that people can receive. Now, I also receive disability benefits, and so do 2 of my children. And that's a way bigger check. A way bigger check than here in my state. It's $200 to get welfare for each child. But if there's something wrong with the child as a result of the drug use, or as just a result of just the child being something wrong with him, he or she, you can get then disability benefits, which is a $600 and some check that you can then live off of and use drugs off of if you choose to. Each time I relapsed from drugs, I didn't see my gynecologist to get the next shot or the next diaphragm or to take that out, or you know what I mean? So you're taking care of your health. So,
Tina, you're saying that you were driven to have more children for the pure reason that you would get more money, therefore you'd have more money to spend on drugs.
Well, I mean, looking at it now, God forbid if I wasn't sterilized, that would be my incentive, because now I'm homeless. Now I'm finally homeless. My drug addiction has taken me to. I had an apartment for 6 years. I was clean, and I lost my apartment as a result of my drug use now. So now I'm completely homeless. You mentioned the disability allowances you were given because of your children who have the disabilities because of your drug addiction, and I know that there's the first study ever to be done in the world. Professor Derek Moore from the University of East London's carried out the first ever study in the US to look at the effects ecstasy has on unborn children, and they have found evidence that babies at 4 months and 12 months showed poorer motor quality, like crawling, holding their head and grasping objects, if their mother had taken MDMA. When were you sterilised? May of 2009. And why were you sterilised? It's just the fact that I kept having babies and couldn't take care of them. They kept taking care of them and raising them. I'd get them back for a little bit of a time, but, then I'd relapse again and they'd be back into the system. And it was just enough already. I'd had enough. I'd had enough of my daughter dying, and I think it was a smart decision. This last baby that's 4 years old, Michael, my little Saint Michael, he's the product of 2 recovering addicts at the time, but now we're not together anymore, and he's on the street using, and I'm trying to find a place to live and battling using and not using every other day, trying to stay clean.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Juliet Spare. I'm joined by Tina Boyd from Project Prevention in the States, Anthony Ozimic from the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children, Kirstie Douse, Head of Legal Services at Release, and Jad Adams, Chairman of Nightwatch, a charity caring for the homeless in South London.
That's very eloquent testimony from Tina, and something that I'm familiar with from other clients who have had similar kind of lifestyles. And it's very brave of Tina to come on and talk to us in the way that she has, opening up in that way. I wanted to refer to something that had been said earlier in the discussion. It's not a question of the state staying out of people's lives or telling people not to have children. The state already is involved. It's giving people money to have children, and the more children they have, the more money they're going to get. So you can't close that door. The state's already right in there. What the state doesn't do, for example, is to say, we're only going to give money to people who have children in stable relationships. The state isn't saying that, and I don't think there's any way the state could say that. But it could reasonably say we're only going to give money for the first 2 children, and that seems to be a perfectly reasonable thing to do.
Would you say you've witnessed similar stories to Tina's in London?
Absolutely, yes, very common indeed. I mean, I was thinking of someone and thinking of their name just as she was speaking. I was thinking it was just like so and so's life. Yes, it's common.
Kirstie,
I just wanted to take up that point. Tina's story obviously is very sad, and yes, it is. There are other occurrences of stories like that, but it isn't representative of every drug user's life. And what we need to remember is actually that this is a long, it's not even long term, it's a permanent sterilisation. It's not intended to be reversible. And what that then does is it leaves no room for someone to change their lives, and it leaves no acceptance that people can recover. It's a long-term changeable condition, and yes, people do relapse, as we've heard Tina say, but many people do become drug-free, and they go on to live completely different lives. And by sterilising someone at a stage where they're in a chaotic part of their life, you're preventing them from having children in later life when actually they could well be fantastic parents. So preventing someone from doing something when they're at a vulnerable point, and exploiting them actually as Project Prevention and other organisations that might pay financial incentives to people to be sterilised or go on to long-term contraception is abhorrent, I think. I mean, they're vulnerable, they're being exploited, and yes, if they are currently using drugs, then being paid $300 is going to be quite attractive to them.
Tina, can I ask you, do you feel exploited by Project Prevention? Was the money an incentive for you?
No, not at all. I get $1,400 a month, so $300, no, that was nothing. But the fact that I didn't have any more children to... Right now, I'm 41 years old. I've been pregnant 8 times at a bunch of different stages in my life. If I can't get this right, I'm eventually going to die. My addiction will kill me. Why would I take another person with me? Down with the ship, as it were. You know, I made an informed decision. No one coerced me. I had plenty of time to think about it. You can change your mind. It's just you have to think. You know, at this stage, I've had enough children. I've had plenty of children to know that I don't need to be having any more.
Anthony Ozimic,
You know?
Tina, that's her right to have chosen.
Yes, but
Listening
if she's
clear-sighted
enough to understand that it's not a good idea for her to have too many children, then she should then abstain from intercourse. She should not then, at a vulnerable period in her life, in fact, where she may not, in fact, legally even be able to give informed consent to a medical procedure such as sterilisation, to then decide on something which is irreversible, it's not sensible, it's not ethical, and it's going to spread to other people in other vulnerable situations, such as the mentally ill, such as people with personality disorders and so on. It opens up a Pandora's box of issues. You can take one case and you can say, well, that seems to have worked for that person. But if you look at the broader picture, there's no limit. It's voluntary at the moment, but it could be compulsory. In some countries, it is compulsory. For example, in China, these people are given money to accept sterilisation. It might be free at some point. So once you go down the route of an ethical procedure, the consequences then become exponential and become very dangerous to the whole of society and to a much larger number of individuals.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Juliet Spare, where we're talking about proposed plans to cap child benefit. I'm joined by Tina Boyd from Project Prevention in the States, Anthony Ozimic from the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children, Jad Adams, chairman of Nightwatch, a charity caring for the homeless in South London, and Kirstie Douse, head of legal services at Release.
Anthony touched on this earlier. We have the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, and that over 80 states globally have ratified, which says that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. That's unfettered. It shouldn't be interfered with by the state.
Jad.
As I was saying earlier, there is another possibility, which is that instead of giving people money and paying lots of attention to them when they're having children, we could just give them some money not to have children and to have a long-term contraceptive implant. And when I say long-term, it lasts for 3 months, 6 months, whatever, and they'd get money on the use of that implant for having it going through another kind of medical procedure, not one related to childbirth, but that would allow people to come out of their addiction, as Kirstie suggests. Indeed, some do. Some people get better. Normally they get better after seeing a few of their friends die from the drugs that they were taking, but they do get better. They do insist later that they're going to get their lives straight, and my organisation tries to help them to do that. Once they've done, if you say while their lives are chaotic, while they're drug users, give them small sums of money to be taking contraception, if once they come off if they don't want the money, then they just go back to that kind of lifestyle, and it gives a possibility that they could turn their lives around, get better, and then stop taking the contraception, and they can have children in a more stable relationship.
Kirstie.
Jad's right, there certainly are viable alternatives to sterilisation, such as long-term contraception, and actually that kind of advice and assistance forms a part of many drug treatment programmes across the country. And what we need to realise is that people with drug and alcohol problems need that treatment. So what we really need to be looking at is investment and access to treatment, so that women and pregnant women who want to have children, everybody has access and equal access to drug treatment, and then they would have access to that advice and assistance in terms of contraception. What practices and policies like the ones that Project Prevention support and promote actually could lead to women not seeking drug treatment because they'll be scared, because they're pregnant and they're going to get their children taken away from them, or they're going to be sterilised, or coerced into sterilisation, or as Anthony suggested, perhaps in the future if that's compulsory. So it's actually you're making things more dangerous for the women themselves. Their health is at risk, and actually you're making it more dangerous for the children that they already have and their unborn children, because you're making them into a hidden population. They'll be too scared to access treatment because they're too worried about what will happen to them.
Anthony.
What I would say is that even on its own terms, Project Prevention doesn't work. I mean, Barbara Harris has admitted that in most cases, the money that is given for sterilisation or contraception goes straight back into those people buying more drugs. So there is an incentive then for people to take up this scheme and therefore get more money and buy more drugs, therefore fueling the whole culture of drug trafficking. And it doesn't do anything to stop, say, the existing children from going on to become addicts. And so we need to be looking at the root causes of drug addiction, not trying to encourage unethical medical procedures and encouraging the state now to take this excessive role in people's lives, saying you should only have children if you're this type of person, or you should only have 2 types of children. That's contrary to our understanding of the family based upon human rights.
Tina, do you in any way regret your sterilisation?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, I like to have the kids back that I lost. I just relapsed like August. My whole life was turned upside down. And I have responsibility to this piece that I brought here. Not to future kids, to my kids who are out there wondering where their mommy is. I'm facing a court case tomorrow. I could go to jail. My son is in foster care, and he's asking me. I had a visit with him. He says, "Don't you miss me, Mommy?" What do I say? Of course I miss you, but the drugs were more important. That's the truth. these kids are not, for the longest time after my daughter died, I just realized that I was trying to replace the one that I'd lost, and I get treatment for that through the mental health services here where I live. But for some women like me, and I've been in the pregnancy addiction programs here in my state, and I've been in treatment programs. The women that I know that I've been in treatment with and so forth, they just want that baby back. So we're out there trying to, it's called fix a feeling with a feeling. That's what drug addicts say. We can do that with anything. We can become, for the rest of my life, I have to worry about being addicted to something else, shopping or eating or this or that, or, it's a big enough battle on my own to fight without having to worry about take the prenatal vitamins every day. You have to eat right. You have to get enough sleep. You have to not be stressed. I mean, stress plays a factor in all of that. So is it, I was clean when I made that decision. I was clean a year and a half when I made that decision to get sterilized. After that baby, I just knew that was it. It was a bad pregnancy. I was advanced maternal age. I had to have 9 different sonograms with amnios and needles in my stomach to make sure that the baby wasn't deformed. I was clean the entire pregnancy, much like when I had my 20-year-old son. And but it's enough. It's enough kids to be brought into this world that don't get taken care of. They end up getting raised by the state, that have developmental problems. That was just my choice.
Kirstie.
I certainly don't think that the state should be interfering with any family's choice over how many children they have, and particularly in relation to those mothers and fathers who have issues with drugs and alcohol.
Anthony.
Yeah, both we and the state need to look upon humans as humans, not as animals. And Barbara House of Project Prevention, in contrast, has compared people who take drugs to animals who have too many children and they need to be spayed, they need to be neutered. I think Tina should look at Mrs. Harris and see that Mrs. Harris does not look upon her as an equal human being with an equal right to found a family.
I think Tina has been very brave in giving us her very honest account of her life. And Tina, do you in any way feel perceived as to be an animal?
Not at all. She actually came down to my house and bought all my kids' clothes. No, not at all. Not an animal at all. She's, out of everyone that I've ever encountered in my addiction of almost 20 years now, I've been battling drugs and alcohol, Miss Barbara Harris is the only person that's ever treated me like a human being and a woman with a right to make my own decision.
Yeah, if I could just pick up on that. It seems it has been a positive experience for Tina, and no one can take that away from her, but we do need to look at the fact that Project Prevention and other organisations are actually targeting black, poor communities, so it's actually being disproportionately applied.
And Jad, final word from you.
I in general support the policy. I don't think anyone should be having more than 2 children. That is, I don't think the state should be supporting them to have any more than 2 children. I don't think this should only apply to particular limited groups, to poor people or to black people or whatever. I think it should carry across the board no child benefit to anyone for having more than 2 children.
I'd like to thank all my guests, Tina for sharing her experiences of drug addiction and parenting with us, Anthony Ozimic, Kirstie Douse and Jad Adams, the chairman of Nightwatch.